This bridge is a necessary route to work and play for millions of people. It has been that for me too. It has also been my gateway to some amazing experiences. Making this movie has been one of them. I'd been shooting scenes in this pub across the road. Most people fondly called it the Straub. What you're watching no longer exists. The Straub had been a fantastic venue for 8 years. I'd been coming here for nearly 4. And then one day, quite suddenly, it stopped. The venue, I mean, not the music. Much of the story of this movie took place in the Straub, but it was the music that all of us in here loved, and it was the music that fired my enthusiasm to make this movie. This is not a road movie. You might call it a shuttle movie, shuttling between my place and other places, especially the Straub. But no matter how you describe it, this film documents a journey of discovery for me, or more accurately, a journey of rediscovery. Sometimes I went with the camera, other times just with my ears and my eyes. My ears and my eyes. I live by them. Pictures are my first and abiding love. Pictures, do they have fixed meanings? And which comes first, a mark or its meaning, action or intention? From the outside, at the receiving end, I don't think it matters. But whatever your answer, my own picture making is promiscuous. I will make pictures in any medium, in any technology. I had taken many photographs of jazz musicians, and I was compiling them in a book in my computer. That's where I wrote. Jazz was, you have to believe it, the origin of my political education. Oh yes, there was the spine-tingling sensuality of chords and melodies intermingling and the pulse driving it all. That's what's so good about it, like sex for the brain cells. But political education? Maybe that's jumping too far into the deep end, but I think you'll get the picture soon enough.
One thing that's remarkable about this venue is the degree of involvement of a diverse audience in music that is often considered to be quite abstract. In these places you get the very strange and moving phenomenon of sitting amongst an awareness, a whole lot of individual awarenesses at a very, very high level.
Well, I mean, I've been playing there for, basically since it started as a jazz thing, at least 10 years. I think that's pretty close to that. And I must admit, I love playing there. Now, that doesn't mean to say it doesn't have its problems, but there has been a really supportive, continually supportive audience at the Straub, which, again, the only way we can develop as musicians is to have an audience, that's interested in what we have to say. If you don't have that, the music's dead, you know? So that has really been the case with the Straub. And it's like, it's really, really gratifying, and it's been totally, the audience at the Strawberry has been an integral part of the growth of the music. So I love it.
playing at the Straw was fantastic. I mean, I think largely because it has been going long enough to build up an audience of people that go there specifically to listen to the music that they know is going to be on. The audience plays a huge role in how a gig goes. You know, that really makes a difference if you have people sitting, listening and appreciating.
How does it feel when you're up there, say in the Straw?
Yeah.
How does it feel when you're playing?
Oh, some nights really good. Some nights you feel like crawling out the door and going home. You know, that's the way it affects me. When you think you're not, when there's nothing happening, you know, you think, oh my God, you know, what am I doing here?
By nothing happening, you mean when you're not happy with what?
Yeah, I'm not happy with what I'm doing. Perhaps the sound or something, or you gotta, you know, you can't, might be it. But the night we did the film, this saxophone wasn't working too well, you know.
Geez, Bern, I thought it was fantastic. When I was much younger, just a kid really, I made a little film with my 8mm camera. It was called simply Walking, and it was, not unlike this present film, a documentary about Sydney, except that it was the Sydney of the early 50s. In those days when I showed this film, I played it along with a microgroove recording by Stan Kenton's band. I don't think Lloyd will mind if his bass solo replaces Stan Kenton for this extremely rare screening. I'm remembering now that I had no idea that there were other people like me all over the world. We were called amateurs then, making these so-called personal films. I suppose the same kind of isolation was felt by jazz musos at the time. This music, even then, was entering my thoughts and joining the influences of modern painting and European cinema. These were influences that, for me, subverted many conventions all at once. Conventions. Anyone who has followed a career path for as long as Bernie has will probably be seen as both part of and outside conventions. Such artists are, in the end, unclassifiable. That's what I think some of us think Bernie is. That's how I'd like to be seen. That's why I have no qualms at all about switching between cameras, brushes, computers, and any other tool. Tonight I'm going to listen to Clarion Fracture Zone, a band that defies being put into any sort of box with a label on it. Clarion have certainly bent whatever categorising instincts I might have had, although all the musos in this film have had a hand in that. When I first started going to the Straw, my feelings about the music were as uncomplicated as those of a teenage revolutionary. This music reminded me then, it still does, of my first experiences of all kinds of art. And I began to see that what these musos were doing was very like what a painter does, face to face with the canvas. But it also helped me to forget many compromises and brain-numbing experiences with academies, bureaucracies and theory. Once again, I remembered my first love, the sensuous pleasure of making patterns of colour and movement. Many years ago, I saw a wonderful film called Jazz on a Summer Day. Certain images from that film are indelible in my memory. Images of reflections on Newport Harbour, edited to the music of a band or bands at the Newport Jazz Festival. These images on the screen now are ones I shot in homage to that older film. At one time in the very early 60s, I spent days with my sketchpad, gazing at the water of Sydney Harbour, trying to capture in marks on paper something of this restless, never-ending fluidity. Much more recently, I held an exhibition of paintings at the Ray Hughes Gallery. Some of those were rather ambiguous portraits of revolutionary figures, but there were also paintings of jazz bands, on some of which the paint had hardly dried, including one based on my experience of listening to Clarion Fracture Zone at the Straub. I invited the co-leaders of the band to see how I'd interpreted them. It's an odd painting. It's a reworking of an idea that I first tried to realise more than 40 years ago. In this very recent painting, the mixture of anecdote and abstraction is something that I learned from the early Cubists and Futurists. I told Clarion that some of my paintings were about politics, and then I held my breath and dived in the deep end when I said to them, one of the things I like about jazz is that it somehow embodies communist ideals without the purges, you know?
But there's no room for democracy in music. There's no room at all. You have to have a band leader who knows what he wants. Yeah. You know, that directs the thing. Even if you're just doing standards that have been played 100 times, you still need one person to decide what the arrangement should be, who should solo, how long the piece should be, what key it's in. You need somebody. There's no room for democracy in music. Now continue.
What had put me off being a musician was that I thought it was self-indulgent, and that, you know, if there's all these people starving out there, how can you justify going and locking yourself in a room for 8 hours a day and practicing the saxophone? But what I realised was that, okay, that's one aspect of being a musician, but on the other hand, what being a musician offers is for each individual person to explore who they are in a very, very humane and inspiring way, to develop who they are and to I felt that if everyone in the world did that, a lot of the problems actually would disappear. There wouldn't be sort of power struggles of people trying to lord it over someone else. I've begun to see that a lot of that was to do with people's insecurities, and that in actual fact music could offer for the player and the audience another attitude to life that in actual fact can help. And I'm not saying for a second that music can solve the problems of the world, but I've began to feel all right about pursuing it myself, and I'm glad I did.
Yeah. I was exactly the same same sort of processes I went through when deciding to go into it full time. To start with, I didn't feel like I felt that was too selfish to do. That eventually decided that, well, maybe what's inside of me is worth getting out. Let's see what we can make out of that, you know. So.
Yeah, I'm in it solely for the fame and the glamour.
Yeah, I know, Tony. Yeah, I know that. Yeah. My father-in-law told me many years ago that he thought it must be very rewarding to be an artist. I don't remember exactly what I said in reply, but I do remember it was loaded with a young artist's contempt for bourgeois attitudes. No doubt whatever I said to my father-in-law was also loaded with self-importance. I wish I could have been nicer to him, the way these musos were when I spoke to them about their work. What triggers the idea to write the tune or the song? I mean, where does it come from?
I don't know. I can't tell you where it comes from, mate. I tell you, a lot of times it just comes from spending a lot of time doing it. You know, just burning the midnight oil. Just sitting there, staying there. You know, until you get something together. You might get a little fragment of a piece, and you get another fragment of a piece, and another piece, and you sometime only put them all together, a bit like a puzzle, you know.
And then that starts to stimulate.
Yeah, and then you might then you see some sort of line happening there, and you add a bit here, take a bit off there, and eventually, hopefully, you might get a section. You say, yeah, that's a tune. Yeah, so you know.
That's how I paint.
Yeah, well, that's right. That's, you know, there's no formula. It's not a formula sort of thing. It's just, you know, spending time and inspiration. I don't know about inspiration. But perhaps, yeah, you know, you might hear something and say, yeah, that's inspired me to do something. I don't know about that. I'm not really sure. I think it's mainly hard work, you know.
Maybe the hard work is identifying the form that the inspiration is going to take. So you'll quite often have this feeling or an atmosphere or a sound lurking around in your head somewhere, and you know it very well, like you know when you've hit upon it. But doing the searching in order to identify it and to give it its proper form, be it playing or composing or organising a band, is definitely hard work. There's no two ways about that.
There is an inordinate amount of hard work, and Bernie's right in that sense. But however much hard work is there, one cannot forget the concept of playing and having fun. You know, the hard work takes place wherever it takes place, more than often away from the audience. But even when one's playing, I mean, you know, sometimes you really hanging, it's like riding a horse or something or whatever, you know, riding a wave. You've got to concentrate, you've got to be there with all your faculties. But that can still be fun.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I don't think the sort of the fact that you're having to work hard to cuts the fun out of it.
No, exactly.
I wouldn't. I mean, I live for work.
Exactly, I do too, because that's the kind of, they go together. You know, it's to do with the commitment. If there's no work, there's no commitment. In other words, there's nothing.
Perhaps you can see why I wrote that Dr. Jazz has taken rooms at the Straub, and that Dr. Jazz can drive away the blues very nicely, thank you, even while she sings them. Of course, other kinds of music are good medicine too, especially, for me at least, piano music. This figure on the left is based on an impression of a piano player at the Sydney Jazz Club. I tried to work it up to a large painting, although I didn't have the skills then. The painting was a disaster. But I was drawing a lot in those days. Drawing is both rehearsal and production. And yet one of the pleasures of drawing is that a rehearsal can be as moving as a finished work. I suspect a piano player would say the same.
One of my fantasies is to be a piano player in a bar, knocking back scotches, moderately, of course.
The reality, of course, is that I'm not a musician. The stuff I play is pictures. A very long time ago I made this drawing, attempting to capture the feel of jazz. I don't remember if I was actually listening to the radio while I made these marks, but I suspect I was. The idea of finding equivalents for one thing in another thing, like a mark on paper or an image on a screen, has been a lifelong quest for me. These marks are, of course, devoid of anything except their own material presence, but I find them incredibly rich in themselves. That's why I love such marks. That's why I love this music. Sometimes, because of its strong sense of structure, Mike Knox's music makes me think of Cubist paintings. Not just the angular abstractions that everyone thinks of, but the fluid metamorphic images that came much later. And Cubism was never just an exercise in formalism. The paintings contained many anecdotes, fragments of everyday life. These glittering images that I made, they too are anecdotes taken from everyday life. When I listen to your solo performances particularly, I think I can hear bits of Debussy and sometimes boogie-woogie in it.
Why not?
Where does it come from? Where does your...
Well, it comes from all those places. I mean, the thing is, I think the difference, well, what gives my music a certain quality, I'm totally actually I shouldn't say totally self-taught. I'm self-taught. I mean, my father taught me in the beginning for a few months, and then he died. So then I grabbed some books, and I've had a, you know, variety of teachers, but mainly like in passing, you know. And I didn't even know what classical music was till I was about 20. And then I got to America and went to Berkeley and got a teacher there who actually had me playing all this quite amazing classical stuff, basically Chopin etudes, Debussy and stuff like that, and Ravel, you know, quite advanced technical stuff. What happened is being a late starter and being an autodidact has given me, you know, a lot of curiosity about things. So I still consider myself a student, and if something turns me on, then it turns me on. And to me, I've always thought the great thing about jazz is that it is an eclectic music.
I think you have a fairly substantial piano technique. To me, it sounds like you've got a lot of training there. Are you a classically trained?
Yes, yeah, classically trained up to the end of high school. Yeah. So, yes, it's helped, definitely. It does help, I reckon. Yeah.
We all have that.
Yeah.
I was a graduate of the Academy of Music in Glasgow, clarinet.
Of classical music as well, and different lots of different composers.
In no sense are you rejecting classical music?
Not at all, no.
Do you listen to any other kinds of music besides jazz?
Yeah, I don't listen a whole lot to other sorts of music, but I do like other sorts of music. I saw a documentary just recently of David Oistrakh, the Russian violinist, and it just blew me away, mate. He was so terrifyingly good, wonderful player, and treated like a third-class citizen by the Russians. Man, they used to send him out on gigs and not give him enough money to buy a cup of coffee and stuff like that. You know, really terrible stuff. But he was just, I put it on, I thought, my God, if you're thinking of picking up the violin, you'd stop and say, no, I'm going to find something else to do. It was like that, you know, just a monster, you know. So great a player, and passionate, like really so passionate, you know, it was just wonderful.
As light as steel, as hard as a feather. That description of Bernie's playing came to me one night as I walked on the harbour bridge. Light as steel, hard as a feather. It might be over the top, but at that moment I thought it was very apt.
You know, there was a time when he was considered avant-garde. And yet you can hear so much of Ben Webster and Johnny Dodds and very, very traditional elements. The tradition of the talking wind instrument, the singing, growling, screaming wind instrument. And Bernie uses these in such an original way that they can sound very, very avant-garde.
An Australian band leader and piano player once said something to the effect that jazz is the poetry of the other side of the tracks. Maybe that's one of the reasons why I like jazz so much. It's a nice thought, anyhow. And it does connect back to many of my early paintings. Even if they had a high degree of abstraction, they always had their origins somewhere over there on the other side of the tracks. I don't often use taxis, but this night I was running late.
Surrey Hills, thanks.
That's how I came to meet Carl Maynard, a jazz-loving taxi driver.
Right. The Strawberry Hills Hotel, you said?
Yeah, Strawberry Hills
Elizabeth Street, didn't you say?
Surrey Hills,
Yes.
thanks, yeah.
Yes. Good pub, that pub.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
Sydney's a great place for jazz. It's changed a lot there. Well, I started listening in the late 50s.
Yeah, where did you go then?
Well, there wasn't much to go. You either went to the El Rocco up in...
Yeah.
Excuse me for a moment. In William Street, just up William Street, up the cross.
Yeah, I know.
Which was sort of Friday nights. And that was good. It was modern jazz, and that's sort of the first jazz
well,
I...
that's what I like. I'm
Yeah,
a modern jazz person, yeah.
It's not on the modernist side, but I seem to see a barrier erected by the pro-trad jazz people who say, look, this is the only form of jazz that there is.
Oh, yeah.
And jazz, any advances in jazz, definitely stopped in 1929, and I could tell you the time of day that it stopped.
I know,
And they're rabid about it.
Yeah.
And I think, well, to me, that's not what jazz is. Jazz is variations on a theme.
Yeah, of course.
And it can be subtle,
Yeah.
or it can knock you right over. But it's somebody's interpretation, and I couldn't say, look, jazz stopped at one moment in time.
I couldn't have agreed more with Carl's thoughts about people who think jazz should only be traditional. What he said that night provoked me to ask Clarion Fracture Zone what they thought about this thing called trad jazz.
The music has no barriers.
It depends on how comfortable people feel, I think, with different sorts of music.
Okay.
And within themselves about handling the differences, yeah.
I mean, to us, there is, like somebody like Duke Ellington, for example, is such a huge inspiration. There's no way in the world that we could begin to sort of erect any kind of barrier to jazz that's gone before us. Absolutely no way in the world. I mean, you know, I don't pretend to be able to play trad. I would be the world's worst trad player, but I love to listen to it, and I certainly well and truly recognise the contribution that it's made in the history of the music.
When there was no music at the Straub, it was, as John Clare once said, just a pub. But this night there was a healthy-sized audience for a gig by Clarion Fracture Zone. This night too, there was a different feel in the performance, although at the time I couldn't put a label to it. Towards the end of the night, the band played this piece by Tony Gorman. He calls it Nomads. And the sadness or melancholy or reflectiveness, call it what you will, that this work contains actually had a parallel with a fact behind the evening's performance. It was the last time, at least for a while, that Tony was able to play with the band that he calls, without possessiveness, my band.
My official phrase at the moment is that just for the time being, I have gracefully withdrawn from all public performances. Yes, I've got multiple sclerosis has entered my life this year. Very interesting thing, and it's affected my hands quite badly. And funnily enough, at the Strawberry Hills, the last couple of gigs I've done there, I've had to, one of them I had to just right in the middle. You know, I just did one set and then I just stood outside for the rest of the night.
Yeah, I remember.
I reached the end of my nervous energy, whatever it was. You know, as soon as I relaxed, my legs would go. And then I tried it again a couple of months later, and it was the same.
Upstairs in this building is Megaphone Studios, where Tony had invited me to call on him while he worked on a new CD. We wanted to continue our conversation about multiple sclerosis. I arrived early and was immediately seduced by the hard Antipodean light that I love so much, and which gave this particular place something of the feel of a painting by de Chirico, without the melancholy, if you see what I mean. Without the melancholy is how Tony went to some pains to assure me is how he wants people to feel about his illness. But to start with, I asked him, do you feel angry?
Anger hasn't been a big part of it. I mean, obviously you get depressed. I mean, it's like, who could imagine such a change in life happening? I mean, it literally happened overnight. I just went to bed one night and then woke up the next day and I couldn't walk. It was like my legs were like big salamis and my shoes were 15 feet thick. And in the initial stages, it was actually quite amusing. There was no pain or anything like that. It was just the most incredible sensation. I just looked like I was totally pissed, staggering from place to place. And then the reality starts to sink in, of course, that there is something major going on. And over the last year, what's happened is half of my face has kind of just left me. So I feel all in here. And when I try and play now, I've actually got my clarinets here because I thought we'd be doing some playing. I brought them in last week. And I had a little blow earlier, and I've just got this huge leak that, I don't know what to do, The emotion that has come out of it is a kind of sadness that is infused with a lot of hope. I think I'm by nature a very positive person, and all these things are really hard to put into words. You mustn't allow yourself to get depressed unless you actually are depressed. If you've got that chemical thing going on that you actually are depressed, that's fine. But you must, for me anyway, you can't dwell on all those really negative aspects because then you can't do any work, There's no point in me being angry because it doesn't help me. It doesn't get me on to the next thing. It doesn't there's nothing positive about anger that I can see. So there's my wee bit about anger.
Anger is a passion that is sometimes said to drive many artists, although I think that misses the point. As Tony said, it's a useless emotion. Before making something, an artist may have felt anger, but the creative act involves just that, making something. Like live music, like this totally improvised little film that I made 30 years ago by punching holes in black film and scratching marks on it. But now, in this populist postmodern age, something strange has happened to the way we listen to, look at art. Everyone seems to imagine him or herself a psychologist, able to discern some simplistic, symbolic purpose in every other's work, preferably, of course, something topical, something easy to understand. I made the same mistake myself when talking with Mike Knott. Listen to this. Not We But One seemed to me to have, you know, quite a distinct Eastern sound to it. There was something about it that had some Eastern qualities to it. But what I'm really getting at, I think, is that the title, Not We But One, is that some kind of veiled reference to the One Nation Party?
Well, no, the title came about way before the One Nation, but it's actually from Maya Baba, a book by Maya Baba, and it's to me the way that I perceive things. You know, not we but one. We're all one under the skin. Everybody's united. You know, whether we want to accept that or not, there's one humanity. Basically, that was it. To me, music, my music, is about something. And to be quite honest, you know, as I said, it's nice to have as a relief to have abstraction. But the bulk of what I do, what the essence of it is about saying something, or at least trying to say something, communicating something.
Dr. Jazz.
At the end of the interviews with the musicians in this film, I asked each of them what they thought of Dr. Jazz.
Is Dr. Jazz a good doctor?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, can Dr. Jazz make us feel better about all that shit that's out there?
Oh yeah, definitely. No, it's it's a rejuvenation process. I mean, if you have a good night, that is really that's a rare thing. When you have a real good night, when you have a real good night, it's a rare thing. When you have a good night, even just a good night, and it's definitely good for the spirit and soul. No doubt about it. Yeah, and hopefully it's good for the listeners too. Hopefully everybody walks away saying, boy, I enjoyed that. You know, whatever it was, a lot of times didn't understand it, but we got some feeling from it. You know, we got a certain feeling from it. That's a great thing. You know, I mean, if people come up after the gig and say how much they enjoyed it, that's a bonus, you know.
Yeah.
Even if just one person, it's really a bonus, man. That's what you're there for, you know. Yeah.
Well, sure. I mean, again, it's an interesting thing because jazz music, you know, jazz is many, many things, to be sure. But in the beginning, the early jazz was a good time music. That's one of the things I enjoy, like when I start listening to ragtime piano and you know, people like James P. Johnson and Fats Waller. You know, these guys had a great sense of fun in their music. And it does make you feel good, you know, definitely. But again, it's not just about making you feel good, and there's many ways to feel good. You can hear Miles Davis, and it'll make you feel good. You know, it's like not necessarily jumping up and down good, but it's just like it's a kind of, it makes a connection. You know, so there's more than one way than the obvious way to make you feel good. And for me, it's like when you recognize in some work of art or some music or something like that, a connection with another human being on a very deep level, that makes you feel good. Not necessarily happy, but it's a connection. So maybe connection is the overriding concern for me, you know, rather than just make you feel good.
Puccini does that for me when it's really brilliantly done. Some of those arias, you know, Puccini, you forget yourself, you float along, a disembodied being, and that's what good jazz does, because it's such a physical kind of thing. It's a kind of music that leaves you open, and so if it's genuinely good, you can't help but being dragged along with it. You don't have time to think about anything else.
I spoke at the start about a journey of rediscovery. What I meant by that was not that I'd rediscovered some lost skills or lost talent, but that this music and my friendships with the artists who make it gave me the confidence once again to acknowledge myself not just as a filmmaker or a painter, but as an artist without boundaries. And that was to be the end of our film. Then early one morning I got a phone call. The gist of it was that the Straw was going to close as a jazz venue that very night. A bit after 8 that night, a shoestring crew got to the Straw, and we discovered that the pub's management had made a commercial decision in the light of Sydney's mania for gambling. That decision was that it would be more profitable to fill the room where the music had happened with poker machines. Between sets, I asked the same question of as many people as I could get the camera to. How does it feel to be supplanted by a mini casino?
Well, it's not a good feeling, David.
Well, it feels extremely sad.
It starts up a few metaphysical questions, I suppose.
Progress. For some, it leaves a hell of a gap.
I don't think the people running this place realise the amount of goodwill that 8 years of having SIMA here has generated.
astonishing of the number of times bands have really tried out their repertoire here, become confident, and then maybe gone on to tour in Australia or overseas, record albums. You know, all that sort of thing has just been so important to the development of the music in the scene here. But I mean, I believe it will be replaced by something else. I mean, there's too many people that have too much love for it to let it go.
I guess it happens in lots of places with geological movements and volcanoes and the decision to fill the place full of poker machines.
After this final performance at the Straw was over, we all hung around the bar for a last drink or two. One of the organisers of these shows saw me looking a little stunned. He looked at me knowingly and said, "Is this your first closure, Dave?" In truth, it wasn't, of course. I know as much about closures as anyone, although with this closure I could have succumbed to a symbol of pessimism. I have to tell you, though, that Dr. Jazz would have none of that.
Traces of dioxin have been detected in eggs and chickens. And now the country's farmers are demanding compensation for lost business. It's Europe's worst health scare since mad cow disease, and it's prompted calls for the establishment of an international body to advise on food safety issues.
The discovery of dioxin in Belgium's chickens and eggs is just the latest in a series of